Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be talking about China Room by Sunjeev Sahota, longlisted for the Booker Prize 2021. So this is not Sunjeev Sahota's first long listing at all. He was shortlisted in 2014, 15, for Year of the Runaways, which was a really interesting book, I thought, looking at the kind of migrant worker perspective, I guess, of kind of a group of Indian workers in the UK, and particularly kind of how they were kind of trapped in a kind of a difficult position because of their immigration status and sort of working in sort of really unscrupulous sort of companies, but also kind of, living like 12 to a room and all that kind of stuff. So I thought it kind of was a really clever book, if maybe a tiny bit overly long. But I think China Room is just such an interesting and brilliant book. And just as kind of with always, before I really go into it all, I will be, the first part of this will be sort of spoiler free, or we'll largely just talk about bits that happen early in the book or that I kind of mentioned on the blurb, so not kind of major spoilers by any means. And then there'll be a curtain fall moment where I let you know that it's about to go into spoiler territory. But by all means, if you want to duck out before that, just before I start talking about spoilers, or if you would like to sort of pause this here and come back another time after you've read the book, then that's absolutely fine with me. Go for it. But yes, the non-spoiler thing, all about China Room. So this book is largely concerned with these two narratives. One is a woman who is sort of one of many, well, a group of about 3 brides who are in this kind of place essentially where they every sort of night their sort of husbands, or who they think might be their husbands, come and sleep with them, and they sort of are trying to work out which son essentially is the one that they're actually marrying. So they'll sort of see them sometimes by day but not know who it was that they sort of slept with the night before. So it's a really, and this book is sort of done so beautifully in that passage, I think, of just really capturing these characters sort of observing everything going on around them. And the second part of the other narrative in this book that is sort of balanced is slightly more modern day, sort of, I think 1999, I want to say. It's sort of either late 1900s or early 2000s, sort of late 90s, early 2000s. And the premise of that is that there is a sort of young man who is essentially sort of struggling with drug addiction, and he is going back basically to a sort of family farm in India from the UK, to kind of essentially have a bit of rest and relaxation, and kind of as a bit of a way to wean him off drugs. But what I think is really cleverly done is this book then kind of marries those two together. So we learn a little bit that the farm that he's around is also sort of the place where the other story happens, and it's all sort of family members. I think it's a great grandmother, or grandmother for the book. And I think this book does some really, really clever things, and I really want to talk about what those are. So these bits will be non-spoilery, but I will go into some spoilers later. So I think what for me is really clever about this book, and kind of grips me from the beginning, was the power of this writing. Sahota writes an absolute blinder here, I think. These characters are very real and very believable. There are so many details, particularly in the section with Mehar, the bride character, the sort of older time. What's I think so clever about this book is particularly those Mehar sections feel like they're all about observation. So not only the author and sort of narrator noticing details, but it feels like so much is happening wordlessly. Characters will kind of express quite a lot across a room with just a turn of an eye, or sort of a small movement of their mouths. And it feels very much like we're kind of put in the perspective of these women who are looking, well, every character is kind of part of this sort of quite bizarre, well, not bizarre, but this quite kind of strict social hierarchy. And so it feels like at all times characters are watching each other to kind of realize and sort of understand where they fit within everything. If this character is saying this, what does that mean for me later? So for Mehar, what does it, if I see this man act in a certain way, does that mean that he is my husband? Or does it mean he's not? Does it mean he's ashamed? Does it mean he's not? And I thought it was just so clever because this feels like a novel of watching people, and it feels like every sort of little detail is like we are following the track of a character's eyes as they dart around the room. So sort of looking to a face and trying to understand what each minute sort of movement of the face is kind of communicating, and then looking back round and kind of constantly assessing your role within the room and your status within the room. And that's what I thought was so clever and beautiful about this book, is characters are constantly on the lookout throughout this book in a way that feels so suffocating, because everybody is sort of attached to these really tight rules, and they're all trying to work out how they can deal within it. Nobody feels relaxed, everyone's kind of tense and on edge. And I just thought this was so clever all the way through. This book has some absolutely stunning parts of, particularly the opening scenes, I just think are ridiculously beautiful in terms of how the language captures some of that feeling. I will say, you know, that the kind of passages involving the sort of modern day weren't always as, you know, I still really enjoyed them. I just think that it's such a tonal shift from Mayhar and the sort of the brides. So it kind of was a bit startling at first, but actually once you ease into that part, there is something so good about having a kind of a perspective to kind of shift you out of it, because it just makes it that little bit more startling when we go back into Mayhar's world, and we realize the sort of the difficulty of her situation. And here's where I might start talking a little bit about spoilers, so please you know, please, if you do not want to hear any spoilers, they're not going to be major ones, but probably. But if you want to avoid spoilers, feel free to pause the video and kind of come back a bit later. But for now, on to some spoilers. So, at one point, Mayhar and some of the other characters are basically trying to work out their escape in this kind of difficult scenario. They're all kind of trying to find a way that they can make their lives their own again. And there is something so brilliant about the way that this is done for me, that it really does feel not only that you're kind of cheering for these characters in that sense, but also you're intensely worried for them. We already know from all of the looks around the room and all of the little details being described that this is an incredibly suffocating environment at times. And so when these characters are trying to find a way to do that, how do we follow that? What do we see? How do we know that they're going to be okay? And it kind of again marries with this idea of the son in the kind of modern time, who is really struggling with his own addiction and sort of trying to recover from it. But we see that he does things like also looking around the room and trying to see who he might be able to get some money from to be able to fund his habit. And it again did sort of feel like on a sort of similar level with this sort of dual narrative, that whenever we saw him sort of leaning towards drugs and sort of leaning towards getting money to try and score a hit, it's terrifying. We really feel for this character and really want them to survive and make the most of things. And that can be incredibly difficult and incredibly suffocating as a reader. Similarly, as a book, it is also really quite tight. It's about 250 pages or so, but it is actually really quick because of the sort of very short chapters to kind of introduce certain bits and whatever. And again, that I think ties into this idea of characters watching each other almost, because it feels like we're getting these chapters at times almost furtive glances rather than whole scenes and whole sections. So a character will sort of notice something, go to do something, move something, pick up something, and that feels like it has significance because it's a moment of these characters having agency, and those moments are so rare and so few and far between that it feels like they're almost these little private victories being recorded, and I just think that's so brilliant and so cleverly done in this book. We also have a lot around what this is going to mean for the longer passages are kind of dedicated to the son, and so he almost kind of has sort of standalone parts to kind of really explore something with almost them sort of back to sort of very short moments of the women. And again, that feels sort of important, right? That, you know, the son has this sort of lengthy detailed descriptions of things, you know, the longer chapters, and the women get kind of short set pieces because that's essentially how their lives operate. Their lives are essentially going between, you know, sort of going between basically avoiding one disaster at a time. You know, what can they do to make sure that they appease this man who might be sleeping with them, what can they do to sort of try and snare the right husband or work out the right husband. These little glances between characters are so well observed and clever that I just thought was so beautiful throughout. So yeah, I think this is a book I didn't really have too many expectations of it going in. I'd read, you know, Year of the Runaways, thought it was interesting, but I was really intrigued and sort of blown away by this book. I just thought it was so quietly beautiful, and heartbreaking, but like, but beautiful. And I really loved this. I mean, this is difficult now because it's another one where I'm like, put it on the shortlist, and that shortlist is very quickly going over 6 books, which is difficult now. So I'll have to make a decision. But I just think it's such a beautiful and brilliant book, and I really urge you to check it out. I hope you've enjoyed that. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about other books you might have read that are similar, or other books on the long list, or even just what you thought about China Room. You know, the sort of China Room at the heart of this book is just such an interesting place where women are essentially kind of locked away and kind of made to be physically isolated from everybody else, as a sort of form of punishment. And it's interesting to see sort of how isolation and punishment come up later in the book when we're talking about the man who is addicted to drugs, and how that, you know, addiction is a very isolating place as well for people, and isolation is again a lack of connection for so many people. So I just thought it was so beautifully done. But yes, any other books you might know on kind of similar ideas or themes, and just generally what you thought of the book. But I've been Bob the Bookerer. I hope you enjoyed this, and take care, and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.